Yes, yes.
So welcome back, CSC 239, Scientific Computing Applications. Today is the 2nd of November, Thursday. We wanted to just reference where we are in the module. We posted an assignment that's due this week on inferential statistics applications. And we reviewed the first part of our segment on inferential statistics applications in our Tuesday class on Halloween. What we'd like to do is wrap up the review for inferential statistics and then give you time to finish your assignment and then to log your first attempt of the module for assessment by the start of our next class. So this is the assignment of reference. And in order for you to do well on your first attempt of the module 4 assessment, you're going to want to finish this assignment before the week is out. And basically there's a easy to follow PDF with a step-by-step, and then we also provide the data files for you to use in the activity so that it's quicker and easier for you to accomplish the end result. And so everything you need to complete the 4.3 assignment is provided. The descriptive statistics assignment and the inferential statistics assignment are each worth 8 points. So the two of them are worth more than your assessment. And I just wanted to be sure that everyone was aware of that and that you took quality time to do that. When you finish with the first assignment for the module, macros and pivot tables, if you haven't completed that yet, that's 2 more points. So we don't have a specific solution, but we have some larger assignments, and the 3 of them together make up 10 points or 10% of the course average. So I've noted that a number of students have yet to engage some of these, and I want to make sure that everybody understands how important it is to finish those. If you only study the material in the study guide, it's not gonna go as well for you. And I just thought it would be good to share a word with the wise. So hello, Khalil, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Right, so as we finished on Tuesday, we were talking about a simple way to determine how best to select which of several inferential statistical methods to use for a certain scenario. And one of the things that we need to call out before we start is this idea about an independent and dependent variable. So to date, we've reviewed the 2 types of statistical data, right? The 2 kinds of statistical data, discrete and continuous. So if there are measurements involved and finely granulated, right, highly granular metrics and the values that are being logged for a given data element fall on a continuum or a range of data, that's called a continuous kind of statistical data. But if the data elements that we're capturing are more like categories, right? They're well-defined choices. That's called discrete data. Everybody remembers this, right? two kinds of
Yes.
statistical data, right? And it's easy to get confused at first, but we went through some examples, and there's a recording of that. When we could have an entire course on inferential statistical methods, but we wanted to cover some of the most popular and basic ones. And in order to figure out how to use this chart, at the bottom of the page, you have to understand the difference between the term independent and dependent variable. So you've heard the term variable before in mathematics, right? And in scientific computing applications, when we refer to a variable, we're talking about a given data element in a data set, okay? So in the same kind of manner that a variable is an abstract in math, when we talk about variables in statistical analysis, we're talking, the term variable is synonymous with a specific data element, right? So we're doing experiments, we're tracking the way that data elements change during that experiment. And when you have a data element that you intentionally change or control, right? So you choose one of the elements, one of the data elements in an experimental scenario. When you change or control that data, that's referred to as the independent variable. Okay. And so you have different values, right? When this generates a result in other data elements, those other data elements are referred to as the dependent variable. Okay. So here's a quick example. Let's pretend that I'm studying heat and water and steam, right? Liquid water, steam, and heat, right? Is everybody with me?
Yes.
Okay. And let's pretend I want to do some scientific experiments to understand how liquid water, heat, and steam are related. Very simple situation, right? And let's pretend that I want to change or control the amount of heat that's put into the water, right? That would mean that heat is the independent variable, because I'm controlling or changing the inputs associated with the data element we call heat. And we could measure heat in calories, or we could measure heat in British thermal units. Has anyone ever heard of BTUs before? How
For air
about,
conditioner,
say again?
for air conditioners.
Yes, air conditioners. Air conditioners are heat pumps, so they move heat, and the amount of heat they move is measured in British thermal units, or BTUs, in the British system. In the metric system, the unit of heat exchange is the calorie, right? And oftentimes when we're talking about food calories, we're talking about kilocalories. So if you eat a cookie, and a cookie has 60 calories, a chocolate chip cookie that has 60 calories of energy content is related to the heat, right? Those are kilocalories, even though we don't use the word kilo in front. So you know that matter and energy are related, and that's a matter of physics. But if you take a certain amount of the mass of a substance, and it's used to generate heat by burning or combustion, then sometimes they produce a lot of heat. Anyway, not to get off on a tangent here. In this case, I'm changing the amount of heat I put in. And if I put in enough heat after a point, I'm watching the state of matter. So matter is solid, liquid, or gas, right? And in some cases, plasma, in special cases, plasma. But on planet Earth, there are 3 states of matter commonly: solid, liquid, and gas. Those are which type of statistical data are the states of matter? Continuous or discrete?
Discrete.
They're discrete. That's correct, because they're categories. Something is either a solid or a liquid or a gas. Now, you could have a solid that's at room temperature, and you could have a solid that's at 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 90 degrees Celsius, but it's still a solid, and the temperature is continuous because there's a scale of temperature, and we can measure that. And so when we measure and there's a scale, and there's you know, this range of values, temperature would be a great example of continuous, right? Or the number of calories that we put in for heat, right? We could have 1 to 50 to 1,000 to 20,000. That's a range of values for heat. The thing is, when we apply heat to a mass, it's going to change from a solid to a liquid at one point, and then after a point, it's going to change from a liquid to a gas. So those are dependent variables, right? So that would be a quick example of how this is. The independent variable is the data element that is often manipulated or controlled in a systematic manner with intended inputs. And it's the dependent variable. So the value of the other variable depends on what's happening with the inputs for the independent, right? So if you're changing inputs, remember that's independent. And then with regard to the experiment, if there are other quantities or data elements, other variables that are changing as a result, their value is said to depend on what's going on with the independent variable. So we just want to be very, very clear about what those 2 terms mean. Remember that the word variable is synonymous with the term data element. Does anyone have any questions or comments about those 2 terms yet? So this is worth mention here. In an experimental scenario, there may be multiple data elements or factors, multiple variables, right? And what you want to do is systematically perform input changes for just one. So to the extent that you can vary things, you want to choose a particular data element or variable and change just one while you're keeping the other variables unchanged. You're not doing anything to change those other data elements. And in that sense, you're keeping those variables constant. Now, when scientists study what happens with the dependent variables, they'll notice that one or more of the other data elements will start to change. And that's where the magic happens. So there could be no changes in some of the other variables, but profound changes in one or more, and that's where they start to identify dependencies. That's where they can begin to understand, hey, there's a connection here between this particular data element or this particular quantity, and while it's changing, we have other things that are playing out over here. When you refine those experiments, you can even get to the point where you identify cause and effect or causality. Okay? And that's really important. So we've said that two data elements can be directly or inversely related. And then we said that if we study them enough and we find out that there's a consistent relationship, there's something connected between those two variables or data elements, that we have what's called a correlation, right? We can look at how one varies related to the other. So we can actually calculate correlations with an inferential statistical method called regression. Has anyone ever heard of linear regressions? Regressions? Or linear regressions? Okay. All right. So when we want to determine in what manner or to what degree two data elements are correlated, then we use linear regressions. Now, being related and cause and effect are not the same thing. So we've mentioned before that variables or data elements can be related to each other directly or inversely, but that doesn't mean that one causes the other. Okay, it can appear to be the case. However, with the right kinds of study, after a point, when you continue to experiment and there's a strong confidence, statistics can prove this thing called causality or cause and effect, right? So has anybody ever seen cautionary labels on products that says this substance is known by the state of California to cause cancerous tumors in laboratory rats? Has anyone ever seen a disclaimer on a product like that? Seriously? Okay, so you may or may not be aware, but some governments are more progressive than others about health and safety. And in California, there's some legislation, Proposition 65, right? And Proposition 65 basically provides for the use of government resources to test for things that hurt people, cause disease and cancer, right? And when you're trying to determine relationships between a set of data elements and other qualities, like, health indicators, there's this substance called acrylamide, right? And so California does a lot of testing, a lot of safety testing. And when they change or modify the levels of acrylamide that are exposed to laboratory rats, what happens is that cancer is induced, right? And when you have a relationship that's been studied, you have two things that are not just related, but demonstrated consistently all the time, right? That changes the whole conclusion of your scientific study. So you can You can draw a conclusion that one thing is the cause of another. That's where causality comes in, right? And that's stronger in terms of statistics and the statistical methods and proof that are required are much more stringent for causality than to identify a correlation, a relationship between two quantities, right? So, you know, there could be a case where cancer appears in an animal and then there's other byproducts in the animal's system. So when they do lab analysis, they find out, depending on how the study is done, it could be that the substance in the animal that's sick is created or caused by the cancer instead of the substance in the animal causing the cancer. I don't know if, does that make sense? So
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
yeah, so it's a finer point of statistical analysis that everybody needs to understand. Things can be related, but that doesn't necessarily mean that one thing is the cause of the other. Unless, of course, you can extend the studies and the statistical analysis, and then you get to a place where you can prove it. When you can get to the place where you prove it, here's the thing that I want you to understand. Causality has to be very precisely stated. It says studies showed it produced cancer in what? People? California didn't line a bunch of citizens up and say, hey, we want to change the level of acrylamide you're exposed to see if we can prove cause and effect. We need to demonstrate causality with regard to human health. They weren't able to do that because nobody in their right mind would go ahead and sign up for a scientific experiment like that, right? Does everybody understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, but what could California do? California could conduct very highly controlled, very credible, very consistent experiments with laboratory subjects like rats. And because they could define everything precisely when they, okay, so this is where the lawyers step in too. So the lawyers cut in and they go, yeah, you can't say that acrylamide causes cancer in people or in dogs, because they didn't do the study with dogs. They didn't do the study with river otters. They only did it with laboratory rats. So they can make this statement to affirm causality, but only if they're very deliberate in their choice of words, right? And that's the point I'm trying to make. So causality is a very specific thing, very hard to prove, and it takes a lot of data and a lot of statistics to do that. And what I want to do, with that understanding in mind, what I want to do is get back to the basic methods and just proving relationships, either directly related or inversely related. So when you're using this simple chart, part of the challenge is to match the right inferential method to the given statistical challenge. And Dr. Stephen Ratchford, some summers ago, provided a great presentation to our Eastern Caribbean scholars, summer undergraduate research interns, right? And so the College of Science and Math sponsors all sorts of STEM research during the summer. It's a fascinating program. There's really cool stuff that happens. And he explained some things about how the inferential statistical methods can work in a very straightforward manner. The trick is to identify the variables based on which one is independent and which one is dependent. So in every scenario, when you have a quantity that's being manipulated or controlled, that's the independent variable, right? That's the independent data element. And so what you have to do is determine first which variable is the independent one and which one's the dependent one. That's the first step, okay? Then the second step is to determine, okay, is that variable or data element the kind of statistical data that we call discrete or the kind of statistical data that we refer to as continuous? Is everybody with me so far?
Yes.
Okay. States of matter, the amount of heat input, right? If we vary the heat input, we're controlling and changing the heat. So that's the independent variable, right? So once you determine those specific criteria, then you're ready to use this simple chart. So you select the appropriate column based on the independent data type. So our independent data type in the example that we chose has to do with heat input. That's a continuous data. That's a continuous data type. So I'm looking at the top of the chart. That's for the independent variable. The dependent variable has to do with the rows. So the columns are independent variable. The rows happen to deal with the dependent variable. And I'm dealing with a continuous data type. And then when I look, I'm looking at the row based on the dependent data type. The dependent data type is discrete in this case. So I select the appropriate column based on the independent data type, whether it's discrete or continuous. In this case, it's continuous. So I'm in this column right here. I'm in this column right here. And then I select the appropriate row based on the data type or kind of data that's used for the dependent variable. And in this case, it's discrete. So I'm looking at the rows. Where the column and the row intersect, that identifies the square and the inferential method that is best suited for that given scenario. And there is an exception, and we just gave that to you with our scenario. If there is a variable, an independent variable that's continuous, and a dependent variable that's discrete, that's the one case where there isn't an inferential statistical method defined. Okay? But let's change it. Okay? Let's change it and change the example real quick and easy. Can anyone think of a simple scientific study that involves food and people? Well, now this seems pretty obvious, but we're just going to use an obvious example, right? So how do we measure body mass? What's the best way to measure body mass? Hello? What's the
Using
common
speed.
what's the common unit of measure for mass? Not weight, mass. In the metric
Kilogram.
system. Yes, kilograms in the metric system. Thank you. Okay. So it's kilograms, right? kgs. Okay. How do we measure food consumption?
Kilocalories.
Yes. kcals, right? kcals, right? So kilograms and calories. Now, I'm just going to ask the question, right? Remember, scientific method is about the question, isn't it? We start the process where we make our observations, and then we have some ideas, we have some curiosities. Remember, we said we started this whole process by saying Einstein told everybody that it's the question. It's more important than the answer, right? So what you have to do is devise a scientific method based on a hypothesis, okay? And the term inference comes into mind, right? And one of the things that you want to do based on the hypothesis, all right, so you make some observations, you infer some things based on the observations, then you pose a question and you propose an answer to the question. That's called the hypothesis in terms of the scientific method. Is everybody with me?
Yes.
I'm going to flip this. I'm making observations. I noticed that when people with large body masses are consuming food, they eat more food. Okay? So as I observe people and the food they're consuming, and these are just observations, right? I notice that large people eat lots of food. So I have a question. Now, what's the other possibility in this picture?
I mean, you could also say that do people like smaller eat more food because they're small?
Right? There's a correlation, right? So do people eat less food because they're small, right?
No, I was just saying the way I said it because I know some people who have problems with what's the word? Like I can't figure out the word right now, but they have
Like an eating
metabolism. Yeah, no metabolism. So the
ah,
metabolism is their metabolism I think it's high. So they would like eat a lot of food to try and like not be skinny.
right.
So that's why I said it the way I did.
Well, so I'm just thinking in unconventional terms, right? And why am I doing that? You know what most food studies involve? People make an assumption and they say, "Oh, I see people are bigger because they eat lots of food." In obesity studies, it's like the flip of that is the focus of the study, right? So they observe food consumption, and they observe body mass. And after observations, you start to infer things, right? So you're trying to draw conclusions based on your observations. And then what you want to do is you want to consider important questions related to those inferences, right? And a lot of times people are saying, oh, I think people have a large body mass because they eat a lot of food, right? But think of the reverse of that. Is it possible that that's not the case at all? We've got it wrong all this time. Now, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, right? But let's pretend that you were observing things. You were from another planet and you dropped into planet Earth and you're watching people, you're watching their food consumption, and you're looking, you're observing, you're measuring their body mass, right? Couldn't you infer a different question, right? So in terms of the scientific study, could you not pose the question or the hypothesis that people eat more food because they are large, right? So you're doing the reverse. You're saying, okay, I think that large people eat more because they're large, right? They don't get large because they eat more food. They eat more food in the first place because they were born big people. Now I know that's a bit of a stretch, but the point is that you can infer different, the point I'm trying to make is you can infer different questions based on how you go about the observations, can't you? I mean, isn't that, do you get what I'm saying here? I mean, it's
It's
just,
open to interpretation.
yeah, it's open to interpretation, right? And the observations. Now, when you have a hypothesis, let's say I'm going to pose a hypothesis and I'm going to say that based on my observations and my inferences, I want to know, are people large because they eat more, or are people eating more because they're large, right? And the next step is to generate predictions. It's to generate predictions, right? And then once you've generated predictions, you construct or design an experiment to validate those predictions. You're not doing the experiment to answer the question that's framed by the hypothesis. You're conducting the experiment to validate the predictions that are based on your observations and your question and your hypothesis, right? Your hypothesis is an informed answer, right? Based on what's inferred from the observations. So here's the thing. I'm looking at a unit of measure. So when I'm working inputs, right? I could vary body mass and then observe consumption rates, right? Or I could alter food consumption inputs and measure body mass. Do you understand what I'm saying about how we design? You can design the experiment in different ways, right? So I can select different individuals based on body mass. I can vary what I'm studying based on the body mass, or I can vary what I'm studying based on the food consumption. But the important thing for you to understand is your determinations. Let's go back to this. Let's pretend that I'm changing the food input let's use the common sense approach to this, okay? I'm just going to use the common sense approach now. We'll change a gear here. I'm going to intentionally vary the food input in calories. Now, is that the dependent variable or the independent variable? I'm changing the amount of food that individuals are allowed to consume. So
That would be independent.
that would be the independent variable is correct. Yes, thank you. And calories can be measured on a scale, can't they? I mean, it's a range of values. So you could be allowed to eat like a half a pizza and it's 1,200 calories or 2,400 calories with dessert, or add a salad and cocktails. And I mean, the point is it's a range of values, right? So food intake is continuous, and then I'm measuring the body mass in kilograms. That's a range of values too. So I start with the independent variable. I determine what it is I'm talking about. Food intake in calories, and that's continuous. That's a continuous kind of statistical data. And then I'm taking the body mass and I'm measuring how that varies based on what's put in for the food intake, right? That's continuous. If I look at this row and I look at this column, this is where it intersects right here, and this is the inferential statistical method of choice. Okay? Does everybody understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay. Has anyone ever heard of genetics?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Has anyone had a genetics course?
No, I haven't.
Okay. But do people understand that what DNA and genes are?
Just the basic understanding.
Okay. And let's say we did a scientific study and we wanted to compare, are you ready for this? Not body mass, but blood type and eye color. And, well, no, let's make it more interesting. I want to know, let's see if I can, if hair color and eye color are related, okay? I'm curious about that. Now, you could say blood type and hair color and blood type and eye color, because, it's like, O positive people, well, they have brown hair more than other people. But let's keep it simple, right? Whoops. Is hair color, when you classify hair color, are there specific types or is it a range of values? How do we commonly define hair color? Is there a continuum of hair color with all sorts of different numerical values? I mean, do we talk about hair color like, yeah, that's like we do colors coming out of like um, like printers, okay? Where we go into here and we can specify a range of, do we normally look at a person and say, okay, their hair color is I'm trying to get this thing to behave now. It's not behaving. No, nuts. All right. So do we look at people and their hair color and say, yeah, oh, that's a gorgeous red 256, green 125, and blue 167? Or do we look at somebody and go, what gorgeous brown hair? Which of those ways do we measure hair color? Do we measure it in discrete categories, or do we measure it as a range of values on a continuum? Is it continuous or discrete in terms of what kind of data is hair color normally, commonly? And stay with me.
I would say continuous.
Well, let me ask a question. When you go
Mm,
to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, how many different kinds of hair color do they have on driver's licenses?
the same.
Yeah,
Is
they have like
discrete.
they have the same set of hair color, don't they? It's like what are those types? It's not a trick question. Give me an example of a hair color you'd find on a driver's license.
Red,
Red, yes. What else?
Brown,
black,
Brown, black, yes. What else?
blonde.
Blonde, yes.
blue. Well, that's not common, but some people dye their hair that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Those are discrete, those are discrete data types, right? Those are data elements that are discrete kinds of statistical data. Now, what about eye color? When you go to the BMV, I mean, do they have some sophisticated scale they measure eye color with a range of values? Or do they have specific categories for eye color on your driver's license?
Specific category.
A specific category, right? And what are the different colors of eyes? There aren't very
Brown,
many, are
blue.
there? Say
No.
again?
Brown, blue, hazel.
Brown, blue, green, and a
Yeah.
mix would be called hazel. So a hazel would be a blue-green, right? I'm a hazel. But beyond that, I mean, we don't have amber, not usually, right? I mean, that's found in animals. Amber eyes, bright amber eyes, that's different. Comes to human beings. So where am I going with this? In genetics, if you wanted to understand, if you had a study that you wanted to conduct, and you wanted to say, I want to know if there's a relationship between blonde hair and blue eyes, because I think every time I see blonde hair, there's got to be a connection. They have to be related, because whenever I see blonde hair, I always think blue eyes and blonde hair, right? It's got to be a thing. There has to be a relationship there. And I want to understand, is that a thing? Or is it completely random? I can have blonde haired people that have green eyes and blonde haired people that have brown eyes. And I want to know if they occur in the same frequency. And if they don't, that means there has to be some relationship there. Maybe the gene for blonde hair is on the same, it's on the same chromosome with blue eyes. Maybe there's some genetic connection there, right? There's a connection, there's a correlation. Or let's take it a step further. Let's say hair color is related to longevity. Hair color is related to a certain disease. People with blonde hair have more body mass, they're more obese, and they have high blood pressure, right? when we're talking about that, what I want you to understand is if we're talking about genetics and there's discrete traits, genetic traits, like eye color and hair color, the independent variable and the dependent variable are both discrete and discrete. And in the field of study we know as genetics, the chi-square test is very common, okay? And that's just one thing I wanted to share with you today. Now, what happens if we're talking about another study where we want to measure like body mass and hair color? Well, and let's say that body mass, I'm gonna select and I'm gonna vary the independent variable is going to be hair color, right? So that's in this column. And then I'm going to say that I want to know whether or not body mass is related to hair color. And I'm measuring in kilograms. That's the dependent variable. It's continuous. In that case, I'm using something called a t-test. If I have two things that I'm comparing, like body mass and hair color. What if I'm comparing three things or more things, like hair color and eye color and body mass? Because I want to understand if there are, if there's relationships between two or more things, not just two things, but, you know, we said earlier, in an experimental scenario, there may be multiple data elements or factors to consider, right? And if we systematically perform input changes to just one, and we watch what happens to the others, we can find some pretty interesting connections very quickly. The trick is how we organize and structure our experiment. If we have more than two qualities we want to study, we're dealing with, and it's continuous, the kind of data we're dealing with is continuous for a dependent variable, and the independent variable is a discrete kind of data, then we're dealing with an ANOVA test. The ANOVA allows us to determine if there are relationships between three or more quantities, three or more variables, okay? I love genetics because it's so straightforward, and a lot of times people are trying to see if there's a relationship between one genetic trait and another, and you read about chi-squares all the time. So if you have a dependent kind of variable that's continuous and you have an independent variable that's continuous, it's actually pretty simple when you look at the possibilities here. We want you to know and be able to determine based on the information I give you. So for a scenario on your assessment, I want you to be able to think first, okay, am I dealing with an independent variable or a dependent variable? And then once you figure out which is which, ask yourself, all right, what kind of data are we dealing with? Discrete data or continuous? And then just go to this chart and look at the columns first, then look at the rows next. The only scenario we can't use the chart to select an inferential statistical method for is a case where the independent variable is continuous and the dependent variable is discrete, right? Because it doesn't work. Has to do with the types of numerical analysis methods that you would apply in this case. Any questions about what we've shared here?
No.
Okay. In your two assignments, one of the things I wanted to tell you about this descriptive statistic assignment is that when you read this, you'll find out that it's very, very specific. So when you go into here, have we talked about this yet? I think we've mentioned a few things about it. I did show you how you add the module, right? There's an Excel add-in called Descriptive Statistics.
Yeah, I believe you want to talk about
Yeah, okay. So you should have something that looks just like this, except instead of showing my name here, it'll show your name. And so if you run into any snags on this, you should give us a shout. That's pretty straightforward. This inferential statistical method, right? So you're using the data to perform an ANOVA analysis based on 3 or more variables. And then you're also performing a correlation. And once you finish this, you'll be ready to engage the module assessment. So I'm going to go out here. Now, the first thing you'll do is perform a regression analysis, and then you're going to analyze data to see if there's a correlation, right? Based on the value of the output, it's a p-value. You can determine whether something is correlated or not, okay?